Oh, yeah. Welcome in, everybody, to the Cream of the Crop Fantasy Hockey Podcast presented by Apples and Ginos. You come for the apples and you stay for the Ginos. That's how we do. I'm your host here, Blake Creamer. Please follow me over on Twitter/X. It's at Blake Creamer AG. And while you're at it, please hit the Apples and Ginos Discord. The link is in the description of the show here. You get your buns in there and you do it now. All right. We got well over 1,000 fantasy managers talking shop in there. It's awesome. It's my happy place. Joining me today from beautiful Las Vegas, where he's attending the NHL Awards and the NHL Draft, is a very special guest, director and senior fantasy editor at the NHL. And he's been gracious enough to spend some time with us here today, Pete Jensen. Pete, how's the weather down there? I've heard Vegas is a dry heat. Is there any truth to that, or what's the situation there?
Hey, how's it going, Blake? Appreciate you having me on. Appreciate the work that you guys do covering fantasy and betting and stuff like that as it continues to evolve. And yeah, Vegas has been hot, really. Even at night, it's over 100 degrees, hot air blowing at you. Have had, a lot of some downtime, some work time so far in the trip, but have been able to enjoy the weather for sure, because it's a nice place for sure this time of year. The last time I was in Vegas was for the All-Star game a couple of years ago, and it was just about as cold as in New York at that time in late January, early February. So now I'm getting like a real sense of what the weather is like out here when it gets nice.
Yeah, true Vegas. When you just walk outside and you get slapped right in the face with some heat, that's insane. Yeah. Well, on that note, so how has your experience been there in Vegas? So you attended the NHL Awards last night. What was that like?
Yeah, it was cool. It was a little scaled down from the past, but it was great theater. I think, especially with like the Kucherov McKinnon debate for Hart. Really, until that was announced, I know we knew McKinnon won the Ted Lindsay from earlier in the show, but like you didn't really know how that was going to go. There was a strong case for 4 players this year, including obviously McDavid, who boosted his outlook and profile, of course, in the Cup final run, and the Conn Smythe winning it for the losing team. But of course, it's a regular season award, so he finished behind the other 2 guys. And outside the top 3 was, oh, by the way, Austin Matthews with 69 goals this year, a historic goal scoring season. So yeah, it was an awesome night, and a lot of debating for sure, even after the award was announced.
Yeah, you know what makes for good television? Anytime they get Kucherov on the mic. All right, this guy, just talk about a personality. He's just a dynamo on the ice and off the ice. Am I right, Pete?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny to think too, like what how did people decide their vote between those two? Yeah. I think people in the fantasy space have known all along that Nathan McKinnon, if he stayed healthy for a full season, was able to put up, maybe we said a couple of years ago, oh, if this guy stays healthy, he could put up 120 or 130. He put up 140 last year, so very deserving, but he did finish behind Kucherov. So, maybe did that narrative from the All-Star game where he was, kind of messing around and a little lackluster at times in the skills competition. Did that sway some people's vote in the media? It may very well could have. So we'll never know for sure what everybody was thinking, but again, Kucherov had more points. And when you look back at the both of those teams, Colorado and Tampa Bay, dealt with injuries and some adversity this year. But when you look back and think, like, right for the first month and a half or 2 months, Vasilevsky was injured. And then for such a chunk of the season, Sergachev was out for Tampa Bay. The fact that they even made the playoffs, let alone give Florida a good run in that first round series, is a marvel. And it's because of Kucherov. So you could have made that case for Kucherov, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's really no reason for us to expect otherwise with Kucherov moving forward, is there? I mean, there's this narrative out there, and I guess it was true at one point, but that he's injury prone. Well, that's really not the case anymore. I mean, this guy's flying. He's playing full seasons, and he's one of the best power play performers around, like, that's ever been. So, I mean, I don't see any reason why he won't do it again. But I think that value in draft season is probably sapped. I mean, he was going late first round in drafts last year, and look what he was able to do.
Yeah, and he was like, I remember we were looking back, like, he was like the safe pick at number 4, but you knew that Tampa Bay was gradually declining and was going to be without Vasilevsky. So some people, including myself in some picks, went a different direction at number 4. So I think it's one of those things, like even with McDavid, I mean, maybe that will change after this marvelous postseason, but it like kind of, not that you take it for granted, but when these guys just do it year after year after year, maybe some of the voters are swayed more towards the surprising playoff team or the surprising, scoring leader in a particular category, as opposed to the guy that McDavid or Kucherov, like those are the two guys, regular season and playoffs, over the past, 5 to 7 years, almost 10 years in Kucherov's case. Like that guy's been insane, better than anyone in the postseason, whether they were winning cups or before that or now after, where they've been losing in the first round. Like he's still arguably better than anyone in the postseason. So I think maybe for next year, like especially with the Draisaitl contract uncertainty at the moment, with him entering his UFA season next year, if he stays with Edmonton, like you can make a case for Kucherov or Matthews, right? For number 2 behind McDavid in fantasy rankings, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always format dependent as well. But I mean, McKinnon this year, I was really happy to see it. Like that's been bubbling for a long time. Obviously, we know this guy's elite, but yeah, for him to just pop off the way he did, it was great to see. And Colorado in general, what a fun team to watch. Like the way they play offense is just that's the type of hockey I want to watch, honestly. Defensively, sometimes a little bit suspect in the zone and the goaltending as well. But, McKinnon is, just amazing. And that team's pretty much a wagon offensively. But all right, well, let's get into it here, Pete, because I got a bunch of questions for you. And I really appreciate you stopping in here. This is awesome, taking time out of your day, because I know it's going to be busy there. I have this feeling that this week is just going to be ludicrous over there. Is that kind of your take as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of big names involved in various situations right now, right? Like Saros got locked up, but Marner could be on the trade block. Draisaitl, a little uncertainty there. I would probably be surprised, not shocked, if he was traded at some point. But again, Edmonton is one of those teams like so close to getting over the hump, losing to the eventual Cup champs 2 years in a row. If you're looking at things from a betting lens, I mean, that's got to be them and Carolina as the two teams that like are really destined to eventually get over the hump here with a couple of tweaks. But yeah, the Stamkos contract situation, he may very well hit the open market. There are other significant players like Sam Reinhart entering free agency. Is Florida going to be able to keep all these guys? Even if they have trade Ekblad, they still got to worry about Reinhart or Brandon Montour, Tarasenko after winning the cup the other day. So yeah, there's a lot of drama here. And then also even with the draft, like you're not so certain who's going to go number 2 after Celebrini. A lot of good defensemen in this class in the top 10 or 11 picks I'm expecting. So yeah, just so much going on, and the landscape's going to change a couple days from now.
I love it. I love this stuff. I'm going to be glued to my TV instead of being outside in the beautiful sunlight. I'm going to be in a basement, watching hockey highlights. So there you go. But I feel like you're with me on this, Pete. So I feel very safe here. You're my brother in fantasy. All right. One thing I wanted to talk to you about and pick your brain a little bit about is how you value players there at NHL Fantasy. And something we pride ourselves on here at Apples and Ginos is our ability to value players and project future performances. And the way we do that is we like to use rate stats at 5-on-5. And things like shots on goal per 60, Corsi 4 per 60, and then individual scoring chances 4 per 60, and then luck stats like on ice shooting percentage, all that stuff. What is your process and your colleagues' process when it comes to valuing players, and how do you sort of find these diamonds in the rough come fantasy season?
Yeah, 5-on-5 is most telling for sure, and the shot attempts percentages and shots on goal per game, all that stuff is really important. Because sometimes injuries derail a player, but then a guy stays healthy like McKinnon and can surpass almost everybody. So, and then also, yeah, just generally points per game is like, even when you're looking at rookies, like you can see like the second best rookie this past year in points and shots on goal played far fewer games than a lot of the guys, but like If you look at Logan Stankoven finishing second, I think, in those two categories, or he was second for most of the year after being called up. It's like you try to project that forward and say, hey, this guy's attached at the hip with Wyatt Johnston. They also have Maverick Bourque coming up next year full time, you would expect. So things could change compared to what they have been in the past with, right, of course, Pavelski sounding like he's going to retire, and Hintz took a little step back last year, and Robertson as well. So, you know, you kind of look at that lineup placement too and try to project the lineup placement. And as much as I value even strength play, and it's more telling than the power play, if you're going to be a power play merchant out there like Draisaitl or Kucherov, like that puts you above most of the pack. And the power play one on defense is such a huge thing. If you can't say for sure that someone's going to be power play one on defense, you can be as high as possible on somebody, but you know, a Luke Hughes might be behind Dougie Hamilton when Hamilton comes back. It just might be the situation. Bowen Byram and Owen Power might, you know, not forever, but for a while still be behind Rasmus Dahlin. So I think a combination of rate stats, 5-on-5, category coverage, of course, always super high on JT Miller and Brady Tkachuk and how those guys can tip the scale in those categories for, again, certain formats. It's really important. Know your format and know some of the underlying stats so that you can put the best decision forth possible when it comes to your spot on draft day.
Yeah, of course. No, I love that. What type of leagues do you find yourself playing the most? Like, what are your favorite kinds?
I like keeper leagues. I've done some dynasty leagues for fun. You know, dynasty leagues, you got to be really committed. I like head to head. I think, again, rotisserie is more telling. Like, you have the great season, you finish first. It's more of a marathon and less randomness. But I would say probably head to head leagues, keeper leagues, where you keep like 3 to 5 players, are my personal favorite. Not counting plus minus, you know, counting something else instead. Right. Like whether it's block shots or face offs or stuff like that, or an advanced stat rather than plus minus. That's probably my favorite type of league. And, you know, you maybe send the 3 to 5 keepers, but like you can keep a couple guys in the first 2 or 3 rounds, just so some of those guys go back into the pool and you don't have the same teams near the bottom of the standings each year. So that's the type of stuff. I'm not a big trade guy in fantasy hockey.
Oh, yeah.
I'm always fielding trade offers from people, from fans. They're always asking me about trades. I try to put them in the right direction, but I've never been like, whether it's fantasy football or fantasy hockey, I've never really been a big guy always trying to, you know, disrupt and overhaul my team on the trade market. I try to draft well and make stealth pickups and project, you know, boom or bust guys on the waiver wire. A lot of the times work out early in the season. So yeah, I'm usually like playing that kind of like long-term game and not blowing up my roster if it's a slow starting team the first couple of weeks.
I love it. I'm leaning that way too. Keepers is something I've only started in the last couple of years, but I played like my home leagues are all points leagues. You know, just 12 team points leagues. That's kind of my bread and butter. But then, yeah, these keeper leagues and head to heads. I'm really into head to head now. I love that, the kind of game within a game, and I love streaming. Streaming is something that I think is a game within a game, and it's that. Yeah, you can really get an advantage if, let's say, you don't draft well, or if you get injuries or whatever, you can outstream your opponent. And that's something I really enjoy. Back to some statistics here. I would like to ask you, can you talk a little bit about NHL Edge and just what's available there, and how has that NHL Edge data sort of changed the way that you value players? Is that part of your, like, part and parcel and when you're looking at players, and how do you use that tool? Because it's something that's a little bit new to me. And I think there's some valuable stuff on there.
Yeah, I think they've done a good job at like introducing some of these stats that have been available on other sites through the years, but just making it more official and also not like overwhelming casual fans with crazy intricacies just yet. Like this first year of Edge stats being available on NHL.com, I've actually covered it pretty closely on a weekly basis, sometimes twice a week, the big moves. You know, Patrick Kane going to Detroit, Jamie Drysdale going to Philly, some of the deadline moves like the Jake Gensel, Kuznetsov moves, and pretty much a lot of the league trends. You can look at all the high danger, mid-range, shots on goal, save percentage, shooting percentages, and kind of see like why guys like Zach Hyman and Sam Reinhart had such massive goal scoring seasons, because they dominate the high danger areas. Pretty plain and simple, like on the goaltending end, Jacob Markstrom led the NHL in high danger save percentage. And he was playing for a non-playoff team, and a team that continues to trade away its top talent, from Tkachuk to a lot of the other guys, like even Mangiapane yesterday. So maybe he gets a boost and gives the Devils bounce back appeal after that trade. You can see in the betting odds market, they're back up right near the Rangers, 6th or 7th or 8th, depending on the book, even though they missed the playoffs last year. So it's all intertwined. Fantasy is intertwined with betting. It's different entities, but it's intertwined. So I've been involved with the evolution of our content from being strictly fantasy 3 or 4 years ago to evolving into betting, and now the edge stats stuff. So definitely follow our coverage between NHL.com/fantasy. This off season, it'll continue to evolve. NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast is we talk about fantasy. We do a weekly betting episode during the season, and then we work in some of those edge stats, myself, Nick Alberga, and Anna Dua. So definitely check that out as a complement to your guys' podcast. And it's good to have differing opinions. It's good to take other stats, more advanced stats into account, because, nobody's going to be right on everything, but a lot of the time you find some hidden stat gem and it seems to translate at the end of a long season, right?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's just because I put so much effort into analyzing hockey, and I use the advanced stats. I watch a lot of hockey, but there's that aspect that you just can't quantify, is there? And that's always going to be that luck aspect. And so, yeah, you got to take this stuff with a grain of salt. And like you said, that there's no one stat that's really going to, give you exactly what you need there. So it definitely is a benefit to listen to more than one person and kind of just make your own thoughts on the thing, isn't it? So, on that, first off, I like NHL Edge stats there. It looks beautiful, first off, and there's some interesting stuff in there. So I'm definitely going to be adding that to my repertoire as I analyze players this upcoming season.
Yeah, and it's going to keep evolving too. I know they're going to add more stats gradually, maybe for next season. We'll see, but they're also like I found it interesting because like they don't let you do game span stats at the moment. I know that it's in the works. It's going to come eventually. I'm looking forward to it coming because you want to see who has the most high danger shots on goal or goals or whatever, lowest shooting percentage, that type of stuff since January 1st, or like those kind of trends. And that's why it was fun when it got to the playoffs. Like you're able to view the playoff edge stats separate from the regular season. So you could see who had the hardest shot, who had the fastest speed burst. And, all of a sudden, Arturi Lehkonen, who had a banged up regular season, was around, whether it was high danger or speed bursts. And then all of a sudden he had a great first round series for the Avalanche, just for some random example at the top of my head. But like you can kind of look at some of those trends and then project future production off of some of those stats. So that's what we'll continue to do. And as the site evolves, we'll continue to break it down for the website and try to translate it for not only the diehard fans like ourselves, but the casual fans out there, because you don't want to alienate people like that. You want them to understand and try to keep it where it's not overly complicated for someone maybe that's only watching hockey once or twice a week.
Yep. That's a really good point, actually. And I think that's one of the biggest things I like about the NHL Edge stats. It's user-friendly, right? Like, and not, I'm going to shout out Natural Stat Trick as well, because that's the site I use a lot for all my advanced stats. But yeah, it can be a slog at times, right? I mean, it's a lot of numbers. And I find that when I'm looking at this NHL Edge, it just looks really nice to my eye. So shout out to those legends who made it, and shout out to you, Pete. I do want to switch
Thanks.
gears here. I want to talk a little bit about some draft strategy. There's something that we do here at Apples and Ginos. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. And we call it the 0G draft strategy. And the basic idea there is you're using less draft capital than your opponents, right? So you're basically fading goalies sometimes well past the 10th round in fantasy drafts. I just wondered, have you heard of that draft strategy, and what are your overall thoughts on the goalie position in fantasy drafts?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but there always seems to be a crazy performer that was available outside the top 100, sometimes multiple guys, right? Like Connor Ingram this year, or one of the previous years, it was Jacob Markstrom with the Flames, and so many other guys, that just end up being huge surprises. Binnington back in the day. I mean, it seems to happen every year. And sometimes it's a guy that's proven that gets underestimated because of a change of scenery or whatever it might be. Linus Ullmark, I'm not particularly crazy high on that situation. Clearly his individual numbers could go down, but what if he stands like on his head like he did with Buffalo those couple of years, and Ottawa rounds into form and makes some tweaks on defense? And we all know they have some of the best young talent in the league, and we're all waiting for Brady Tkachuk to play in the playoffs for the first time. So again, we're always choosing between some of these teams from the outside that are going to jump in, but Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, crazy great example from last year. Everybody, including myself, was high on Devin Levi, saying he could win 30 games as a rookie. And all of a sudden, this guy who we used to be high on in the past comes out of the woodwork and almost carries Buffalo despite their injuries and scoring inconsistencies and everything. Almost carries them to the playoffs, right? Like they missed by a little bit there, but they really caught up late in the season. And with about a week or two left, they were still in the mix. So I think it's an example where it's like you can never. Cam Talbot last year too, value contract. I mean, the first half of the season, he was like a Vezina contender. So yeah, back to what you said, you're not going to want to really draft goalies in the first couple of rounds moving forward.
Yeah, well, and then you look at players like, Sorokin, who, depending on your format, it was a pretty rough start. I don't know. How do you find yourself approaching the goalie position when it comes to your drafts? Are you comfortable picking up some of those higher end guys in the first 5 rounds, or are you sort of waiting till afterwards?
I think it's, you could, and it's tough because there are those proven names. Hellebuck, 2-time Vezina winner. Vasilevsky's a beast. Of course, he was injured entering last year, so that made it dicey. You can always pinpoint like whether Georgiev's peripherals are going to be up or down. You know that a workhorse goalie for a team like Colorado is going to get you 35, 40 wins. You knew that Stuart Skinner was going to get you 30, 35 wins last year. Jake Ottinger, I was really high on last year. He finished the season strong, but had some bumps in the road. That's the issue I have with drafting a goalie or 2 goalies in the first 5 rounds is like, what if Edmonton started that slow last year and didn't have the wherewithal and resiliency to recover? That could have been a terrible pick wherever you took Stuart Skinner. Jake Ottinger dealt with some injury and those inconsistencies I mentioned. Finished strong, but for most of the season was not a top 5 goalie statistically. So that pick could have burned you easily if Dallas didn't recover. So I think we see a lot of these examples of, and Sorokin last year, like maybe his, numbers were not indicative of how he was playing and his save percentage and facing so many high danger shots. And Varlamov pushed later in the season and took over the job randomly. So the Sorokin pick last year in fantasy was not good at all, despite him still being one of the elite goalies out there. So it's like one of those things where you have the elite goalies, you know who they are, but all these circumstances change and fluctuate. And then all of a sudden you're looking at, hey, I expected a lot more from Vasilevsky or a lot more from Sorokin or a lot more from, whoever it was, down the list, Shesterkin. Like the Rangers won the President's Trophy, but he had a rough, right? He had like a rough second quarter of the season. So all those guys, like nobody was super consistent from start to finish other than maybe Hellebuck. And then even his year-to-year consistency is
Yeah.
sometimes all over the place.
Yeah, no, it's all interesting stuff, and again, every time I have these conversations, it just drives me even further into zero G. You know what I'm like? You know what? I could have got Charlie Lindgren, like he was on waivers for the love of
Yeah.
Pete, and now this guy's a legend. So, yeah, I think I'm sticking with that. But I definitely like what you're saying there. I really appreciate your time, Pete. Before I let you go, I would love to get your thoughts on some potential sleepers and potential busts going into next season. Just for our listeners here, who do you think might go under the radar? Let's start with sleepers, even one or two, whoever you got off the top of your head there. Who's going to go under the radar in draft season that you like?
Well, I was impressed this past year by the Flyers and, just how much fantasy value they had despite being in rebuilding mode. But it sounds like they're going to get Matvei Michkov into the mix next season, which is awesome, really. They got a steal when they got him in the draft outside the top 5. Curious to see what his ADP is going to be. If you could get him like, I don't know, outside the top 100 just because of the team he plays for. Don't forget that Philly was doing a lot with what very little. And of course, Tortorella always does that through the years, makes the most of his talent. But you kind of look for those bombshell type like players and polarizing players. And I think that like he has some boomer bust potential, Michkov, but it's I'd jump on him outside the top 100 in a non-keeper league just based on his upside. So that's one guy that comes to mind. Looking at some of these other guys from the playoffs that have been performing, certainly Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven, the rookie of the year race is going to be loaded next year. It could have two guys from the Sharks if they draft Celebrini, and then Will Smith. I've been really high on Will Smith. Had a great year at BC, and that could change a lot when, even though the guys are young, like think about it last year, the impact Connor Bedard had, and he had pretty much no one else around him. If I'm not saying the Sharks will have 2 Connor Bedards, but they might have, 2 really high-end rookies in the same season and an improved roster. I know they picked up Grunstrom, they picked up Jake Wallman, who could maybe run their power play 1. So we'll see what they do the rest of the draft week. I expect maybe some more moves from San Jose. And as of record time, they have not only the first pick, but the 11th pick. So keep an eye on some of these teams that missed the playoffs last year. That's where you get the value, right? Buffalo, if they take the next step, Zach Benson had some really nice performances last year, but lacked in consistency. In his second year, maybe he gets stronger if he's playing up top with Tage Thompson. If they buy out Jeff Skinner, all of a sudden that guy could be a top line player and a guy that catapults in the rankings. So keep an eye on all those off-season moves, and not just the guys moving, but the teammate beneficiaries. And you could even look for some of these Anaheim Ducks guys, right? They're just stockpiling young talent. I was really impressed by Leo Carlsson last year, and I feel like that team could be a lot better this coming year with all its young nucleus building right now.
Yeah, I like all that. It's weird. This is the 3rd podcast in a row where I've talked about the San Jose Sharks. That's literally, the San Jose Sharks are the worst team I've ever seen in my life last year. And I think they're sneaky good this year. They've got some pieces that can actually do something for fantasy. It's just going to be pretty risky to me. Like you said, boom or bust. But yeah, they've got some bits and pieces there that I'm really interested in. What about maybe a player you might be fading, Pete?
For next year, Linus Ullmark comes to mind just because you're used to him being a part of that elite goalie tandem. By the way, Jeremy Swayman, how he looked in the playoffs, say what you want about if Boston's maybe going to trend down. Some people, including myself, expected them to trend down a little bit this year, but they still almost won the President's Trophy and stuff like that. So, but Swayman has a chance to be like the best. We'll see where he goes in drafts. I don't expect him he'll probably go like either a little inside or a little outside the top 40 or so. But like I could see Swayman being the number 1 goalie next year across the league because he's always had that potential. So yeah, maybe fade Ullmark on the other side. Vancouver is tough. It's kind of like that New Jersey Devils profile from the previous year where they caught everybody by surprise. They were all over the awards market. JT Miller was magnificent with a 100-point season, and Quinn Hughes won the Norris, and Tocchet won the Jack Adams, and Demko, if he didn't get injured, might have taken them to the third round of the playoffs, and maybe could have won the Vezina, was right there most of the season with Hellebuck. So, but again, does that team have the staying power? They've had inconsistencies. Maybe you're not as high on Vancouver next season. It's going to be interesting to say. There's at least something worth debating there. So I'd be a little cautious with Vancouver and some of their top guys, depending on what happens this offseason.
Oh, God, I hate to hear this, Pete, but I think you're bang on there. The level of efficiency that the Canucks showed last season, that's not something we could bank on. It's really not. But I do like Pettersson for a bounce back. I think he's actually going to do better, but everybody else, no. But that's Pete, thank you so much for joining me here. I know I want you to get back to your time there in Vegas. I think, again, I'm excited to hear about what goes on here in the coming days. But before we let you go, why don't you let us know where the people can find you if they aren't following you already, and maybe what NHL.com has in store over the off season here.
Yeah, we'll be releasing our rankings, top 250, all the various lists, sleepers, deep sleepers, bounce backs, top rookies, team by team previews, like we always do, 32 and 32, usually in the month of August. And NHL Fantasy on Ice will get its season preview episodes going sometime after the draft and free agency. So expect the first episode to drop sometime in early mid-July. And yeah, we'll be mixing in some summer plans, of course, with it being the off season. But you guys know as much as anybody, right? This content never stops, and the conversation never stops, and building your rankings and all this type of stuff. So yeah, check out the podcast to complement the great work that you guys are doing, and check out the Edge Stats stuff. We're going to try to ramp that up even more this off season in previewing the new season and tying it into fantasy and betting. So we'll try to have you covered as best we can here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. Appreciate that, Pete. And it's something I mentioned offline, but I'll mention it online as well. Just your success in particular in your podcast has been an inspiration to me, just as an example of, what you can do in this space. So just congratulations to you on all your success, and thanks for what you do. I'm excited for your rankings and what happens with NHL.com/fantasy moving forward. Pete, you're a legend.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the kind words. And you guys are on a great track yourselves, no doubt. So keep up the great work. And yeah, you could follow us, and we try to answer as many fan questions as we can on NHL Fantasy, and my handle, NHL Jensen. Used to be primarily Twitter, but we're all over Instagram these days with video, sound bites from the podcast, and answering. We actually get more volume of questions on Instagram now compared to Twitter, or X. So it's one of those things. Hit us up on Instagram at NHL Fantasy and NHL Jensen, and we can kind of like answer your questions for fantasy or betting or general hockey all season long, and even in the off season.
I love it. Thanks, Pete. Thanks so much for being here. And
Sure.
Hopefully we get to do this again sometime, but enjoy your time in Vegas there. And that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. We appreciate you. We celebrate you. We salute you. But that's it, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. Celebrate your day. Bye for now.